I think the project on historical thoughts, as envisioned by the Inter-Asia School, I think it's a very important project, a very worthwhile and significant project historically for the region, for Malaysia, for Singapore, for Southeast Asia, because I think we have not focused that much on thoughts or ideas, indigenous ideas in the region that are very critical, very crucial in shaping the histories, the trajectory, the evolution of various nations in the region. We have been focusing quite a lot on ideas coming out from outside. Yes, that is important, but nevertheless, it's also very important to look inside what kind of ideas they have evolved historically. So I think that this is a very worthwhile project. Now, what I plan to do for this morning is when I first showed it to some of my friends the title, so his response was, oh, visiting Malaya, envisioning the nation, the history of ideas, and the idea of history is what a tongue twister. But it is also a thought twister. I think it provokes our thinking. And I cannot guarantee that I have answered the questions, but I think at least I am provoking some thoughts about why we need to look into the history of ideas and what do we understand as the idea of history, and with particular reference to revisiting Malaya. Now I want to focus on 4 issues, given the time limitation, and I think we should have time for discussion. First is what Daniel has already mentioned briefly, that what has been the debate, especially among historians, on the concept of nation. Is it imagined or is it conceptualized? I think that is the first thing. Second, the contestations about the idea of the Malay world, the Malay archipelago and Melayu Raya. I will take that up too, because I think that is very important to frame our discussion on the emergence of nations in this part of the world, especially in Malaysia, in Malaya, and also in Indonesia. And the third part is post-World War II developments, especially on the contestations on the ideas of nation-making after the Second World War. And I want to focus a bit on the ideas put forward by the Constitutional Working Committee proposed by the British, the Malayu's representative and UMNO, and versus the ideas proposed by the Putra AMCJA United Front. And the last part is some kind of conclusion to bring back to the idea of history and the history of ideas, the history of ideas and the idea of history. Okay, let's move on. I don't want to talk about this, but I think in the introductory speeches just now it was mentioned that we are at a very critical crossroads in the country today, where never in the history of the country that the tensions and the contestation between the different political ideas, political views and ideologies have been pushed. We have, for example, the Malay supremacy, the Ketuanan Melayu ideas, trying to assert the question of firstness, using history to assert the idea of firstness in order to promote exclusionary politics. And on the other hand, we also do read and hear sometimes that the Malays cannot claim that they are indigenous also because they are also immigrants. I think both ideas are wrong, and I want to show why these ideas are not helpful in the course of our discussion. But in the scholarly discussion, in the books and articles on the question of nation, there has been also a lot of debate on the question of emergence of nations, nation building, about the Malay world and all that. And I think this is very good. I think we have historians in this call, Professor Chabunke, Professor Danny Wong, and many others are here. I'm not a historian, I'm a sociologist, as I pointed out. But as a sociologist who is interested in history, and I think history is not a monopoly of anybody. We all can I mean, there are various histories, so to speak, the various histories. So I think this debate about what a nation how we should see a nation, how is it being defined and all that. I think this debate is very good. It will help enrich our understanding of the concept. Now, let me begin with the first question. Is nation imagined or conceptualized? I think many of us are very familiar with the work, with the classic by Ben Anderson. Imagined Communities, first published in 1983, republished many times, and is one of the top most cited books in the world. One of the top most cited books after Kuhn's The Scientific Revolution. Ben Anderson has come to Malaysia, has been to IKMAS, discussed this idea again with him. Now, Anderson argues that nations are socially constructed and that they are imagined by the people who perceive themselves as part of that group. And he argues further that an imagined community is different from an actual community because for practical reasons we do not know everybody in that community. But the point that he emphasizes is that we have a mental image of people who we regard as part of that community called nation. And the factors that have enabled the idea of the nation or the imagination of the nation are the emergence of capitalism and more significantly the idea of trade capitalism. We have media, people can read the same language, so they can have an idea that, yeah, okay, this group of people are part and parcel of what? Of my nation, of my bangsa. I think that is basically Ben's Anderson. And I'm not doing justice to him, but just be very brief to present to you his idea. Now, as you know, his ideas were based on a study of European history. The emergence of nations in European history is different from the emergence of nations in our part of the world. But nevertheless, it is a good starting point to talk about. Now, we have another scholar who also engages with the idea of nation. And just now, as Danny mentioned, he is currently attached to the Institute of Southeast Asia, Institute of Strategy and International Studies, Kuala Lumpur. And he comes here very often, and also has to do IKMAS. Now, his argument in this book, The Invention of Politics in Colonial Malaya, he argues that it is not very correct to say that nations are emerging. Now, his reference is to the Malay world, especially to Malaya. Why? According to him, nations are conceptualized. It's not just imagination. It is conceptualization by the leaders, by the thinkers, about what should constitute the nation in this part of the world. Imagination is too light, according to him. The energy, the passion, the commitment of the leaders in order to construct the nation, it is more fitting to call it conceptualization rather than imagination. So, there you are. His argument is that the concept of imagination tends to disguise the anxiety, the experimentation, the contest, and the sheer intellectual difficulty faced by those who relinquish their loyalty to older forms of community, meaning the kerajaan, that is the Sultanate, and constructed a new form. Okay. Now, in my view, whether nations are imagined or whether they are conceptualized, we are talking about the same thing, this entity called nation. And I feel that both positions are right in their own ways. Because I think you need to imagine first. And then you can construct or you conceptualize. And that is why I use the term envision. Envisioning the nation, which tries to integrate both the ideas of imagination and also the ideas of conceptualization. So, and I think based on the history of our country, of Malaya, the imagination is there, the conceptualization is there. Okay. Now that's the first point that I want to make here. Now the second point is about the Malay world. The Malay archipelago or Nusantara, as some people call it. But in this paper, I call it the Malay world because I want to link it later on with the idea of Melayu Raya. Now, there is also a debate whether the Malay world did it really exist, or whether there was a kerajaan world. Tony Milner used the kerajaan world, the southern world. The people use the term Malay world. The question arose, was the Malay world and Melayu Raya the figment of imagination of nationalist fighters like Ibrahim Yaakob, Mustafa Hussein, Isa Ali Muhammad, Wahdul Al-Halmi, Mustamam, and so on and so forth? The idea to have a greater unified state of Malaya and Indonesia. Was it a figment of the imagination, or was there a basis in history for that idea of the Malay world? Now let us look into some historical sources. Now Yanak Andaya in his book, Leaves of the Same Tree. Yanak Andaya, I think many of us know, as a historian in the University of Hawaii, who has written many books on the history of Malaysia. Now in this book, he argues that there has been a coherence and continuity in Malay history. And he talked about the Malayu, not Melayu, Malayu, as it's spelled, has existed for a long time and refers to a people with maritime civilization built around what has been known as the Sea of Malayu. Yeah, familiar with the Straits of Malacca. The Sea of Malayu is, but the name is not that familiar, right? But according to him, the Sea of Malayu, the first of reference of the Sea of Malayu is from an Arabic document dated around 1000, which noted that travelers reaching the Sea of Malayu were approaching the area of China. Although the Arabic document is not specific, the general reference to a Sea of Malayu approaching the area of China is an accurate description of the extensive network viewed as one sea stretching from India to Vietnam. And he explains further that the Sea of Malayu refers to the voyaging corridor, the corridor of voyagers and travelers from the Indian subcontinent, the Southeast Asian Isthmus, and the northern Malay Peninsula and the shores of the South China Sea. And it goes to the Straits of Malacca, which for more than 2,000 years was the principal route through Southeast Asia, and communities located along the shores were the major beneficiaries of the steady flow of commercial traffic. Now that is the gist of the ideas of Yanak Andaya, who says that the Melayu has existed. There was a name Malayu in history, perhaps for 2,000 years or so, and that they were maritime people, they were travelers, voyagers, and so on and so forth. Though, of course, in other books they say that the term Melayu is a more recent invention related to Palembang, Malacca, and all that. But according to him, it existed before. That the different ethnicities in the region and all. Now, Anthony Milner has a different view. Now, he acknowledges that these groups who were later came to be identified as Malay has existed from early centuries and have engaged in cultural as well as commercial and political relations in numerous directions. But Milner's point is that the problem of coherence and continuity between what was claimed by Andaya of the Malayu of the earlier times with the Malayu of the later period. So according to him, evidence is not that strong to link the continuity. So he says, despite the impression communicated by much of the work in Malay studies, coherence is not the fact is not the hallmark of Malay communities and historical heritage. And that the evidence of earlier centuries does not allow us to speak of Malay with such confidence. So, this is according to him, right? No. Andaya has a different view. That is a difference. Now, anyway, to go further. Now, based on the study of various sources, especially of Malay texts, Malay manuscripts, Milner argues that Melayu or Malays is a civilizational concept, not so much an ethnic concept, as argued by Andaya. And he argues that the expression of the Malay world, Dunia Melayu, is misleading to refer to that. And it might be more accurate to speak of a Kerajaan world or a Sultanate world. So, these are historians also. There's a lot of debate on this issue. Now, as I said, I'm not a historian, but I'm sticking my neck out on this. And all of them are my personal friends anyway. They like to argue. I think Milner is right in some ways. That there has been Kerajaan world. You have got Kerajaan Melaka, you have got Kerajaan Majapahit, you have Kerajaan Palembang, Sriwijaya, and many others. And that some of these Kerajaans are small, some are big, and some big ones like the Sriwijaya managed to extend beyond Palembang, beyond Sumatra into the Malay Peninsula. Malacca also managed to go beyond just the peninsula into Sumatra and all that. There were attempts at trying to unify, based on the Sultanates, trying to unify parts of the region. Because they were considered as kith and kin among the Sultans themselves. And I think it's here that the concept of cultural zone is relevant. How do we explain this? There were many kingdoms, some speaking Malay, some speaking Japanese, but similar cultures, lots of interaction with others and so on. But according to Milner, we cannot talk about the Malay world because they are Kerajaan world and there are no term of Malay even then. Now my view is that this region is a cultural zone in the sense used by Brodel. And within cultural zone, you can have many sultanates. Now, a cultural zone as defined by anthropologists, I'm quoting Brodel now, is an area within which one group of cultural characteristics is dominant. There are many cultural characteristics, but you can have some dominant. Right? So, I don't want to go into details on it, but we can discuss later. But so the point is that if we consider, we agree that this is a cultural zone, that this area called Malay Archipelago, or the Malay world, or Nusantara is a cultural zone, then the existence of various sultanates within the cultural zone, I think is natural, is logical. So you can have the Sultanate world, but the Sultanate world exists within the Malay world. And that is my argument. Now here, and you can have that world, that cultural zone, even though the name Malay may not have been used then yet at that time. Now I want to draw some parallels on this subject with Chinese history. Now, before the unification of China by the Han dynasty, under the Han dynasty before about 2,000 years or more ago, and also before the Qin dynasty and then later by the Han dynasty. the lands and peoples of China, I mean there were separate kingdoms or empires under the Qing and under the various dynasties in China. Various ethnic groups, various tribal groups, some were at war with one another and all that. But they were unified under the Qing and subsequently under the Han. And Shi Huangdi was the first emperor who unified. Right? Now I stand corrected here, I'm not an expert in history, but my reading of it is, that's my understanding of it. Now these dynasties laid the foundation for a unified China, established a centralized empire and a bureaucracy. And it is on the basis of this unified empire and of this bureaucracy, based on the philosophy of Confucius and so on, that in the early 20th century, Sun Yat-sen led the democratic revolution and set up the Republic of China in 1911, overthrew the last emperor, ended the 2,000 years of imperial rule in China. But was the name China used during the Han? In my view, no. The name China and Chinese came later. Using that parallel, using that in the same way, I think we can argue that even though the name Malay may not have been used to refer to the area that we today call the Malay world, I think it's still valid to argue with. Because very often, there have been cases in history where facts and practices took place first, occurred prior to concepts. Concepts sometimes were coined later. Now, I call this knowledge lag or conceptual lag, a cognitive or intellectual dissonance between ideas and reality. We do not know what to call it, but we practice it. But sometimes, of course, ideas come first, and then you try to invent it, you try to create it. But I think in this particular context, the fact and practices happen, and then a name later on was created or invented to refer to the concept. So, to sum up, I think the Malay world was a historical reality, and Melayu Raya, as an idea, had evolved as part of the Malay historical consciousness. I think that's the historical basis of that. And that it was an idea that underpins the envisioning of the Malay nation of intent. Nation of intent, not the nation of realization. And the first person, I think, in Malaysia who used the term nation of intent was the late Ustam Sani, long time ago. In his work on the origin of the Malay life. And the Malay nation of the envisioning of the Malay nation of intent, the Melayu Raya, was to reconnect the two territories, Malaya and Indonesia, that was separated by the Anglo-Dutch Treaty of 1824. And that historical migration among the peoples of the region at that time, before the establishment of political borders, of the modern state borders, were regarded as normal movements of people. And to say that if they come from, say, Sumatra into Malaya, during that period, to call them being immigrant, I think is not right. Because movements of people at that time were very natural. Until, when state borders were created, then that's different. When there are official state borders, when there are immediate rules, then that's different. Okay, I think that is the first two parts that I want to talk about. Now I want to move on very quickly into the post-Second World War developments, which I think which are very vital for understanding, to help us understand the post-Merdeka developments. Now, I just want to say quickly about the significance of the First World War and the Second World War in the history of the region. I think historians and scholars have said that both World Wars, World War I and World War II, have been instrumental in ending an old era and ushering a new one. For example, the First World War, 1914-1918, saw the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, the Caliphate based in Istanbul, collapse of the Habsburg Empire, Tsarist Russia, the economic ruins of Europe, and the rise of the United States to eventually become the most powerful nation, and the ushering of what is known later on as the American century. The First World War also saw the birth of the first socialist state, the Soviet Union, the birth and expansion of some communist parties in some countries, the stirrings of nationalism, and the emergence of independent struggles, and also the birth of several new nation states, such as modern Turkey, led by Kemal Atatürk. And also, the First World War had impacts upon, besides political and economic impacts. And by the way, this is the 100th anniversary of the First World War, centenary of the First World War, and my institute, IKMAS, is organizing the centenary conference next week. First World War centenary conference, that he mentioned just now. But I want to relate here that among the impacts of the First World War on Malayan politics then, besides the Singapore mutiny in 1915, in February 1915, was a Tok Janggut uprising. Professor Chia Boon Keng has written on this. I read this piece and I found it fascinating. And the fact that the uprising was not just about the taxes, the land taxes and all that, but it was connected to the First World War, to the fight between the Ottoman Empire and the Western powers. And there were rumors that the European forces were defeated by the Muslim Ottomans. The Indian mutiny, the mutiny in Singapore believed that too. They refused to fight with the Allied forces, with the Western powers, because they said, how can we not fighting against the Muslim brothers and sisters? So Tok Janggut and his followers, besides rebelling against British imposition of taxes and so on, also had the idea that this is a jihad, as issued by a scholar, the venerable scholar in Turkey, that this is a jihad impact. So that impact, I think that is very important. But you want details, you have to read Professor Chia Boon Keng's articles on this. I think that's what the First World War. Now the Second World War, or more so the specific war, 1941-45 for us, is caused a pivotal change for Southeast Asia and for Malaya. And what is important is the defeat of the colonial powers, the British, the French, the Dutch, and all that, by the Japanese, shattered the myth of European invincibility and the white man's superiority. And the method from the nationalist movement was that it gave confidence to the nationalists that Asians could take the destiny in their own hands to fight for independence. And I think that was what inspired, among others, people like Sukarno, Hatta in Indonesia, Ibrahim Yaakob, Bustamam, Burhanuddin, Mustafa Hussain, and all that in Malaya, to align with the Japanese to fight against the Western powers for independence. I think it was, why Western powers wanted to mobilize people for the anti-fascist united front, but the nationalists in Indonesia, in Malaya, in India aligned with the Japanese. And that is quite intriguing. Now, just to go over quickly, this spec is very familiar. the plan then was, the Melayu Raya champions was to declare independence together between Indonesia and Malaya within the framework of Melayu Raya or Indonesia Raya. To declare it in August. The meeting was in Taipei. In Sukarno, Hatta, Ibrahim Yaakob, Sabah Hussein, and all that in 1945. But of course, it failed. The Malay national intent, the Melayu Raya as a national intent failed, mainly because, I say mainly because, but not the only cause, mainly because of the sudden defeat of the Japanese. Bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki by the Americans. So the plan could not be realized. The British came back, they occupied Malaya 2 weeks later, and some of the champions or advocates of Melayu Raya like Ibrahim Yaakob, Onan Haji Siraj and number of others escaped to Indonesia to continue the struggle. So that, in a way, ended that phase of struggle about Melayu Raya as the nation of intent. That idea of having the two territories to be declared as one. Okay, then the other phase, I think, which has direct relevance to us in post-independence. Now, how much time do I have? 10 to 15 minutes. 10 minutes. Then I put you. Okay. I will try to this one thing, otherwise I should move faster. Okay, after that, you can see the nationalist tide IKMAS was formed in October 1945, and various other organizations like Angkatan Wanggesta, Angkatan Pemerintah, and all that. Now the key question after the Second World War was, what kind of new state should Malaya be? Now the British came with the Malayan Union. Of course it was a problem. Now should it be a union or should it be a federation? Should it be a monarchy or should it be a republic? These were questions. Should it be a democracy? If so, what kind of democracy? Now, the big question was, in the context of Malaya, Peninsular Malaya, there are 9 Malay kingdoms, there were 3 state sovereignties. Right? There was extant or state parochialism was strong. If you read William Ross' book, he said, Henry Pender's introduction of power to William Ross' book, trying to get people to unite to fight the British on a nationalist agenda was like to light fire on the wet wood, kayu yang basah. That was the expression. I don't agree with that, but that was the impression that people like Rock and Harry Bender got about the situation. But the idea of a state referendum was very strong. So, in other words, how to create a new state? So, what appeared possible was some kind of federation, a centralized federation of 9 Malay states, together with the strict settlements, federated Malay states, unfederated Malay states, and establishment of constitutional monarchy and parliamentary democracy along with Westminster's model. Now, then the contestation. Right? We have got the British initiative proposal in June 1946. The British set up the Constitutional Working Committee, 12 members, 6 British representatives, 4 from the Malay rulers, 2 from UMNO, and they make proposals. And their proposals, though revised later on, became the basis for the Federation of Malaya Agreement 1948. And the details you can see there. A Federation of Malaya to replace the Malay Union, 9 Malay states plus Penang plus Malacca without Singapore. So that was announced in December 1946. and there were others. I won't go into details. On the question of citizenship, the proposal by the President was a new Malayan citizenship, which was not to be a nationality. Right? How to acquire citizenship is stated there. I won't go into details. Now, what I just want to highlight is the alternative proposals by Putra AMCJA and Putra AMCJA. Putra constituted of Parti Kebangsaan Melayu Malaya, Angkatan Api Awas Kebangsaan Tanah Malaya and all that, with about 180,000 odd members. Right. Now, AMCJA was a larger federation. But what's important is that Putra MCAJ proposals are united Malaya inclusive of Singapore. That was the biggest difference between the two proposals. Right? On the question of what should constitute the state and the territory and the people. So we asked why did the British want to exclude Singapore? The usual reason given is it will increase the demographic factor. More Chinese, it will upset the English. True, but there was a strategic reason that the British were planning to withdraw from Burma and India, and they wanted to retain Singapore as a center to oversee their strategic interests in the Southeast Asia. That's why they don't want to release Singapore to be part of the new federation. They want to continue controlling it from London. That was the main reason. Okay. Now, Putra MCAJ wanted Singapore as country. And another important point is that there's one important point in Putra MCAJ proposal, which is also very different from the British proposal, the Constitution proposal, was on the question of nationality and citizenship. That in section 2 of the proposal, it states that this citizenship shall be as nationality to be termed Melayu and shall carry with it the duty of allegiance to the federation of Malaya, but it assures that the term Melayu shall have no religious implications whatsoever. That was a proposal by Putra MCAJ. Right? Now, if you see the proposal just now, it is number 9. The term Melayu should be the title of any citizenship or national status in Malaya. Okay. Now, this Melayu is different from the definition of Melayu that was later to be found in the Federation of Malaya Constitution. The Melayu defined in the Constitution is one who professes to be a Muslim, habitually speaks to the language, and adheres to the customs, and all that. So the identity markers are language, customs, religion. The Melayu concept of Putra today is a political concept, not an ethnic concept. So it indicates the openness of the Malay proposal, I mean the term Malay in the proposal by Putra. Okay. Now I want to highlight in this part the way of arriving at the proposals, the two models of consultation and engagement between the British representative of the Malay rulers and UMNO representative on the one hand, and the Putra MCAJ model for engagement on the other. Now, you can see, I think the idea about how to bring people together is very important. Now, the British idea was to set up central working committees, but consists of a small group, and normally it's not open to the public for debate. Once they have got the ideas, then when people want to give views, then they set up a committee to collect views. Now, so this is the British approach. They set up a small committee, they formulate the ideas, and then they publish the views, and then when people protest, they set up what do you call that, constitutional consultative committee, consultative method, to collect views from interested individuals, communities, and groups in Malaya on the constitutional proposals. Now, the Putra MCAGA approach is different. We cannot invite interested individuals, communities, and groups, according to them, but we should invite representatives of those and only those who regard Malaya as a real home and as an object of their loyalty. So there is a difference in regarding who should give their views to the committee. So, in short, the Putra AMCAJ approach, the consultation and engagement was bottom up. It was a genuine attempt at forging unity of various ethnic and religious groups, between gender and between various classes, namely the peasants and workers, who constitute the backbone of the pre-Merdeka Malaysian society. And this is something represented in the country's history. And the coalition of these anti-colonial forces was a clear example of a very broad-based kind of cooperation. Now, what is the significance of the Putra MCAJ model of cooperation and consultation? I listed down 4 here. 1, it was an inter-ethnic coalition that was unprecedented in the country's history, showing the formula for future inter-ethnic unity and cooperation. 2, it was an inclusive multi-stakeholder coalition, workers, peasants, women, youth, intellectuals, businessmen, and so on. 3, it was a coalition of organizations based on shared principles and democratic consultations, guided by the spirit of mutual respect, compromise, and acceptance as the key to the success of negotiations and cooperation. And 4, it was a coalition with an imagination which they also conceptualized in some detail through the People's Constitutional Proposal, an envisioning of the nation from below that had to compete with the top-down envisioning that was proposed through the British initiated Constitutional Working Committee proposals. But though I regard that as very significant, but I think there are important questions also for reflection, and I put them 4. 1, was the Putra AMCAJ coalition deeply grounded? That's an important question for us to reflect. I'm going to answer here. 2, was there an element of triumphalism? Was there an element of triumphalism and overestimation by Putra AMCAJ of its own strength, and underestimation of the British would-be response when these 2 different models and proposals came to a head-on collision? 3, what about the ideas in the People's Constitutional Proposal vis-à-vis the Working Committee's proposal? I mean, in terms of the substance of the ideas. And 4, did the Putra AMCAJ underestimate the divisive potency of this paradigm and place too much hope and confidence in the viability of the class paradigm? I think this poses these 4 questions for reflections. Now the British response, we all know, right? They went ahead with the revised proposals that they made and instituted the Variation of Malaya Agreement on 1st February 1948. That's the first. It's a comprehensive 2-pronged response. 1, went ahead with what they wanted to do in terms of that state framework that they created. 2nd, they used force by declaring the emergency in June that year, accompanied by mass arrest, banning of the various organizations under Putra, MCAJ, and all that. So, and the rest is history. We all know that happened. But post 1948, after the lull of the mass arrest, we see the formation of the CLC, the Communities Liaison Committee in 1949. Tan Kian Lok was the chair of the MCAJ. He was not arrested. The Communities Liaison Committee was formed at the initiative of Dr. McDonald. Members were from UMNO, Wan Jaafar, Tan Cheng Lock, Tulaisingham, and 12 other members. And it is this liaison committee, committee liaison committee that debated further the question of citizenship. But the others who were in Putra and CPA were not included, and of course they were, some were in prison, some in the jungle, and some went to Singapore. Okay, to conclude, what I'm trying to show here is that the ideas that triumphed were those that were supported and enforced by power. Ideas that perished or sidelined were those opposed and suppressed, including by force. But, but it's important, some ideas don't simply die. Rather, they receive or break away. And I think that's why we are discussing it here, right? They come back. Now, some people, some historians call it residue, historical residue. Leftover. I don't like the historical residue term because it sounds like a leftover, right? It's not the main menu. So, but anyway, I think it's correct. They don't disappear. They fade away, lying in the wings, so to speak. So, despite the 6 decades of independence and all that, we hear this little thing coming back. And I think this project is one of the ways of retrieving those ideas that we have, been out for quite some time. Some people say there is struggle over history. I think it's right. It's a struggle over history. And I quote Lisa Wittgenstein. History is very much a political battleground. Yes, it's true. History is a construction written and institutionalized, especially by those with power or sanctioned by power. Dominant history has been written by the victors about their leaders, their ideas, about their actions and glories, while history of the losers has either been maligned, distorted, buried, or forgotten. The winners write history, the losers write poetry or memoirs. As they said. But there is rising awareness regarding the significance of our histories, including people's history. So it's very important to and I use a term here, I borrow from Milton, hermeneutic retrieval. It's quite a fascinating concept, hermeneutic retrieve, to retrieve from the debris of history. Ideas that are still relevant for today, especially ideas that have been suppressed, ideas that have been cast aside, been maligned, regarded as subversive or whatever, and to bring to the fore. Ideas to rethink afresh whether these ideas are of value to us today. But at the same time, I would like to remind what Colin Wood says. I think historians know very well who Colin Wood is, a very famous historian. The important role of agency is not just ideas. There must be agents or agency to articulate and fight for these ideas. So, and conclude on the note there, to know history, we need to also emphasize the internals of history, the thought of the human makers of history, by grasping and reliving the thought of the makers of history.